Welcome to the Midrash Says Out Loud. This week, we will be learning the Midrash Parasha, Vaera. I hope this channel will open your mind to the great teachings of the sages and deepen your connection to the Torah. Moshe demanded to know of Hashem why the children of Israel were suffering even more since his arrival. Has your attribute of mercy turned into the attribute of justice? He complained. It is not as you think. Hashem rebuked him. I am Hashem, the merciful God, even when my actions appear harsh. They emanate from mercy. Your forefathers were better than you. They never complained, even though I appeared to them only by the name of Shaddai and not by that of Hashem, by which I am known when I fulfill my promises. Even though they never saw me fulfill what I promised to them, they did not hold it against me. I assured Abraham that he would inherit the entire erupts Israel, but when he had to go out and buy a burial place for his wife Sarah, he uttered no complaint. I promised Isaac, dwell in this land, and I shall be with you. Yet when he needed drinking water, the shepherds of Gior disputed his right to the well. He nevertheless did not voice a single complaint. I said to Yaakov, the land on which you lie I will give to you and to your seed. But when he wanted to erect his tent, he had to buy a field for 100 acres. Still, he had no second thoughts and did not question me as you did. Even the children of Israel remained loyal to me. They did not rebel under the Egyptian yoke, but accepted my will without complaints, emulating their forefathers. They, therefore, are worthy of being redeemed because of the covenant into which I entered with their forefathers. Go and proclaim that I will surely redeem them, and tell them, I shall lead you out of Egyptian bondage. I will deliver you from any type of service, even the easiest of work. I shall redeem you without ransom. Although a prisoner is usually only released when a ransom is paid. I shall take you as my people by giving you my Torah. This is the purpose for which you are being liberated. The 4 kinds of liberation listed above are granted to you as compensation for laws which Pharaoh enacted against you. Excruciating slave labor, throwing the newborn into the Nile, slaughtering children for the king's bath, and withholding straw needed to make bricks. We drink 4 cups of wine on Pesach night to thank Hashem for each of the above mentioned types of freedom. Hashem concluded his words by promising, I will bring you to the land which I swore to give your forefathers as a heritage. Moshe returned to the labor camps and proclaimed Hashem's message of freedom to the children of Israel. He announced that they should leave the Egyptian idol worship and devote themselves to Hashem's service, for they were about to be redeemed. But the Jews were so heavily oppressed that they did not heed his message, protesting, can a slave serve 2 masters simultaneously? We are enslaved to Pharaoh and afraid to transgress his laws. They were also attached to the Egyptian idol worship and found it difficult to relinquish the practices to which they had grown accustomed. Hashem commanded Moshe, now go to Pharaoh and command him to let the children of Israel go. How can I do that? Moshe protested. When I told the children of Israel of the forthcoming redemption, they would not listen, although these tidings held good cheer for them. If so, Pharaoh will certainly not listen to news that is unpleasant for him. I am no orator, my speech is obstructed because of Moshe's reluctance. Hashem sent Aaron to accompany him and explain Moshe's words to Pharaoh, although Hashem had already told Moshe previously that Aaron should join him. He had then only referred to Aaron's acting as interpreter for the children of Israel. Now he commanded that Aaron should assist Moshe when speaking to Pharaoh. To Hashem instructed Moshe and Aaron to be patient in leading the children of Israel and to treat Pharaoh respectfully. Although you are coming to smite him, Hashem said, give him all due honor because he is a king. Hashem told Moshe and Aaron to command Pharaoh to let the children of Israel go. He predicted, I will harden Pharaoh's heart and then multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt. This did not mean that Pharaoh would be unable to repent because Hashem was hardening his heart. The Almighty's words implied, I will give him an opportunity to do teshuvah for the duration of the first 5 plagues. It is only if he thereafter persists in his wickedness that I will withhold from him my helping hand, which is ready to assist those who do teshuvah. Moshe and Aaron appeared in the palace. Upon seeing them, Pharaoh flew into a rage. Turning to the guards, he shouted, have I not given explicit orders not to admit these people anymore? The guards were confused. We do not know how they could have gotten in. They answered, all the palace gates are heavily guarded. Pharaoh had sworn to himself, When this Ben Amram comes here next, I will stab him, I will hang him, I will burn him, I will find some type of death that will finish him off." But as soon as Moshe entered, Pharaoh became as mute as a stick and did not dare to lay hands on him. Moshe and Aharon transmitted Hashem's message to Pharaoh when the king asked for a sign. Aharon, in the presence of the entire Egyptian court, threw his staff to the ground, and it was transformed into a serpent. Pharaoh began to laugh. "Are these your God's wonders?" he sneered. People usually attempt to sell merchandise in a place where it is needed, not in a place where there is an abundance of it. We Egyptians are the most famous sorcerers in the world, and you believed you could teach us magic. This trick is so easy for us that even my wife knows how to perform it. He motioned to his wife, who in reality was as skilled in witchcraft as all the other Egyptian magicians combined, and said to her, "Do you see these Jews who have come here to poke fun at us?" He gave his wife a staff, telling her to convert it into a serpent. She did so. Pharaoh mocked, "Even to Egyptian children are capable of performing this stunt." He ordered some 4 and 5-year-old children to be brought and handed them rods. They were all able to convert the sticks into snakes. The whole courtyard was filled with writhing snakes. The two renowned Egyptian magicians, Ukoni and Momre, derided Moshe, saying, "Did you intend to sell straw in Ephraim, a city overflowing with straw? Did you really believe we would be impressed with your magic in this country which originated the art of black magic?" Moshe answered, "That is precisely why Hashem sent me here. If someone has good vegetables to sell, he takes them to a market where the buyers are experts and will appreciate them." Moshe's words implied, "Eventually you who are the experts in magic will have to testify to the truth that our wonders do not have their origins in magic. They are supernatural phenomena which can only be accomplished by Hashem's power." Aharon's serpent opened its mouth wide and devoured all other snakes that were slithering on the ground. "This trick is as old as Adam," jeered the counselor Balaam. "Everyone knows that one snake can swallow another. Let Aharon show us if he knows how to make a staff swallow all the other staffs. If he is capable of that, we will know that he is not a common sorcerer, but is aided by Hashem's strength." A miracle occurred, and Aharon's serpent turned back into a staff and devoured all the other staffs. Nevertheless, it was not noticeable that it had just devoured dozens of rods, for it remained as thin as previously. Pharaoh trembled. "What if he now tells his staff to swallow up both me and my throne?" he thought. Nevertheless, as Hashem had foretold, Pharaoh hardened his heart and refused to set the children of Israel free. Hashem told Moshe, "Pharaoh refuses to let the people go. Warn him that unless he listens to me, I shall bring a devastating plague upon him and his people. Go down to the Nile early in the morning to meet Pharaoh and warn him there. He pretends to be a god and therefore goes to the Nile to perform his bodily functions in secret." For kings claimed to be divine, and all of them were humbled by Hashem. Kiram, king of Tzer, proclaimed himself a god. In the midst of the sea, he erected a marvelous palace for himself which rose 7 stories high in imitation of the 7 heavens. He illuminated his palace with lights that resembled those of the planets and imitated the sounds of thunder and lightning by using friction generated by precious stones. Hashem instructed the prophet Ezekiel, "Go to Kiram, king of Tzer, and rebuke him, saying, 'Why are you presumptuous? You are only human.'" "Master of the universe," answered Ezekiel, "how can I appear before him? He knows how to stand suspended in the earth." Hashem brought a wind that carried Ezekiel up to Kiram. When Kiram beheld the prophet, he trembled. "How did you get here?" he asked Ezekiel. The prophet answered, "Hashem commanded me to tell you. Why do you consider yourself great? You are only human. I may have been born by a woman, but I am immortal," answered Kiram. "Just as God has dominion over the depths of the sea, so is my palace in the depths of the sea. Just as God is above the 7 heavens, so am I. See how many kings I have survived during my lifetime. 21 kings of the dynasty of David were buried, and also 21 kings from the kingdom of Israel, and 50 prophets and 10 Kohanim. You see, therefore, that I am divine." Kiram referred to all the kings who ruled until the destruction of the Beit Hamikdash. He lived a very long time, close to 1200 years. Ezekiel rebuked him and said, "There were people greater than you who did not become considered Kirams. Pride originated in the fact that he had assisted King Shlomo in building the Beit HaMikdash by sending him cedar trees. Hashem finally punished Kiram by sending the emperor Nebuchadnezzar, who overcame him, mistreated his mother, and expelled him from his lofty position. Every day, Nebuchadnezzar cut off a layer of Kiram's flesh the thickness of 2 fingers, dipped it in vinegar, and devoured it. Nebuchadnezzar also pretended to be divine. He exclaimed, "I shall ascend to heaven on a cloud." Hashem replied, "You will be cast into the deepest of depths." Hashem banished him to the wilderness, where the former emperor had to sustain himself with grass. Like the beasts considered him one of their own kind, even after Nebuchadnezzar died. He was subjected to the greatest shame and humiliation. For the Babylonians did not believe his son Evil-Merodach that his father was actually dead until he dragged his father's corpse out from the grave, tied it in iron chains, and showed it to the people. Another king who became arrogant and thought he was divine was King Yosh, king of Yehuda. Lay concealed in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, Holy of Holies, for 6 years to escape the wrath of Athaliah, mother of King Achziah, who wanted to destroy the royal seed of Yehuda. When Athaliah was slain, and he was able to leave his hiding place and establish himself as the ruler, the princes of Yehuda praised him, saying, "You must be divine." The Kohen Gadol enters the Kodesh HaKodeshim only once a year, and the entire nation prays that he be permitted to leave in peace. Yet you emerge from the Kodesh HaKodeshim unharmed. After 6 years, they prostrated themselves before the king, and Yosh in his heart believed what they had said. Hashem, therefore, caused the army of Aram to attack him at the end of the year, and they defeated Yosh, leaving him very sick thereafter. His own servants conspired against him, slew him, and did not even give him the honor of burying him in the tombs of the kings. The Egyptian Pharaoh also claimed that he had created himself and that he was the creator of the river Nile. Hashem therefore humbled him, sending Moshe to reveal to him who the true God is. Hashem commanded Moshe, "Go to the river early in the morning to prove to Pharaoh that he is not divine. Take along the staff that was turned into a serpent, for he will recognize it. Recall the miracles performed with it, and be afraid. Say to him, Hashem, God of the Hebrews, has sent me to command you. Let my people go that they may serve me in the desert. But if you refuse to listen, know that with this staff in my hand I shall smite the water in the river, and it will become blood. Through this you shall know that I am Hashem." Hashem's strategy in punishing Pharaoh was entirely different from warfare conducted by human beings. If a man wants to defeat his enemy, he prepares his attack with the greatest secrecy, in order to take the other person by surprise. Hashem, on the other hand, sent Moshe before the first plague to give an explicit warning to Pharaoh. From this it is evident that Hashem hoped that he would do teshuvah and the plague would then be unnecessary. Moshe met Pharaoh early in the morning by the Nile and reproved him, saying, "You claim divinity. What, then, are you doing here now? Does a god also perform human functions? Who said I am divine?" Pharaoh asked him, "Don't you tell that to the Egyptians? And who are the Egyptians? Those fools. They are not human beings. They are donkeys. Does it matter what I tell them?" Pharaoh scoffed. Moshe repeated Hashem's words to Pharaoh, warning him that the Nile would turn into blood, but Pharaoh disregarded the warning. Hashem therefore commanded Moshe, "Stretch out your hand and smite the river." Moshe objected, "Is it right for me to smite the Nile? Someone who drank from a well should not later throw stones into it. When I was placed into the Nile as a baby, the waters of the river did not submerge the basket, but protected me instead. Should I now smite that very water?" Hashem purposely challenged Moshe, hoping that he would respond as he did. From Moshe's answer, we are required to learn the extent of our obligation. In demonstrating gratitude, we should reason that if we must be grateful to anyone who did kindness to us, how much greater must be our gratitude to Hashem himself, who is the cause of all the benefits a person receives and who always intends to do kindness with us. Moshe warned Pharaoh over a period of 3 weeks, but Pharaoh took no notice. Then the Egyptians awoke one morning to find the Nile gleaming with an unusual red color. Word of the shocking news soon spread. The liquid that filled the river looked, tasted, and smelled like blood. All the fish in the river had died, and the river stank. The plague brought upon Egypt was, in a way, Even more severe than the mabule during which the fish stayed alive, the Egyptians began to search for different sources of water, saying, "There must be underground water which is clean." Moshe was able to smite only the water which is perceptible to the eye. They dug wells around the river, but even the subterranean water had turned to blood. Egypt seemed to be saturated with blood. Blood was dripping from the pillars of Pharaoh's palace. Blood dripped from wood and stones. Blood was flowing from their idols. The fruits no longer yielded fruit juice, for when the Egyptians squeezed a fruit, blood trickled out. Even the saliva that left their mouths turned into blood. There was only one source of clear, pure drinking water, the water of the land of Goshen. The children of Israel had as much water as they wanted. The Egyptians streamed to Goshen to obtain some of that precious liquid, but as soon as they tried to take a sip of water, it was converted into blood. Even if an Egyptian shared a jar of water with a Jew, the Jew drank water while the liquid that ran down the Egyptian's throat was blood soon. However, the Egyptians found out that if they paid money for the water, it remained water. They came to Goshen bringing gold and silver and thus enriching the children of Israel. In the depths of their hearts, the Egyptians knew why Hashem had afflicted them with this plague. They worshipped the Nile. The God of the Jews was demonstrating to them that the river was not, in fact, divine. In addition, the sight of the blood reminded the Egyptians of the innocent Jewish blood they had spilled. Furthermore, Hashem was punishing them through the Nile because the Egyptians had attempted to prevent Jewish women from immersing themselves in the river to be pure for their husbands. Pharaoh called his magicians and questioned them. "Do you know how to convert water into blood?" "We do," they replied. The Egyptian sorcerers converted water into blood by magic. Upon seeing this, Pharaoh decided to ignore the plague just as he had ignored the sign of the staff that had devoured the other staves. Hashem was long-suffering with him because Moshe had been nurtured and raised in his house. Hashem hoped he would still do teshuvah. Hashem caused Pharaoh to become exalted in the eyes of the Egyptians so that his subsequent downfall would appear all the more drastic. The plague of blood lasted for 7 days and was accompanied by a secondary plague of pestilence that killed many Egyptians. All subsequent plagues were also accompanied by the additional plague of pestilence. When the 7 days of plague were terminated, Hashem commanded Moshe to warn Pharaoh about the next plague, saying, "Tell Pharaoh, if you refuse to send away the children of Israel, I shall smite all your boundaries with frogs. The river will swarm with frogs, and they shall come into your houses and bedchambers, upon your beds and into the houses of your servants, upon your people and into your ovens, and your kneading troughs." Moshe warned Pharaoh for 3 weeks about the plague of frogs, but Pharaoh did not heed the warning. The second plague was also brought through Aaron and not through Moshe, since it again entailed smiting the river, and it was not right for Moshe to smite the river which had protected his basket. Hashem commanded Moshe, "Tell Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff, so that all the streams, rivers, and ponds of Egypt shall produce frogs." As soon as Aaron stretched out his hand, the Egyptians were amazed to behold a ghastly sight. Out of the river hopped a hideous supersized frog that began to march down the main road towards Pharaoh's palace. Hashem gave the Egyptians one last opportunity to repent before they would be invaded by additional frogs. The Egyptians brought weapons and sticks with which to kill the monstrous frog. Instead of falling dead, it opened its mouth wide and spit out legions of baby frogs. It let out a shrill whistle. And at this sign, armies of frogs came tumbling out of the river, accompanied by other sea reptiles with huge mouths and teeth. They formed a procession and marched down the main road, apparently with a definite goal in mind. The horror of the Egyptians can well be imagined when the frog army headed straight towards the king's palace. Hashem visited the plague upon Pharaoh first, since Pharaoh had become arrogant when he saw that he personally had not suffered from the plague of blood. Hashem therefore said, "You will be the first one to be affected by the plague of frogs." The frogs streamed through the entrances of the palace, up the steps, and into the king's private chamber. Pharaoh was in bed when the frogs leaped onto his blankets, crawled under his linens, and, biting him, intruded into his body. After Pharaoh, all the other noblemen of the Egyptian court were plagued, and then the common people. The frogs filled the Egyptian houses, jumping onto tables and chairs and into the beds of the Egyptians and biting them. The largest and fattest of the frogs settled in Pharaoh's palace. The frogs did not perish even after they had crept into the Egyptians' bodies. They continued making a deafening noise in everyone's stomach, screaming, "How long will we have to stay in here?" Another chorus of frogs in the stomach walls croaked back, "Until Moshe, son of Amram, will come and pray that we be let out." The plague of frogs spread over the entire land. The frogs hopped into the fields and devoured the growing produce. Incidentally, the frogs solved an old dispute between Egypt and its neighboring lands concerning the precise demarcations of the country. The Egyptians claimed certain strips of land which the Cushim felt were part of their territory. The plague clearly defined the Egyptian borders, for wherever the frogs settled was unquestionably Egyptian territory. How was it possible that the frogs entered the houses of stone and marble even after the Egyptians locked their doors and windows? This was one of the miracles of Hashem, who changed the laws of nature, giving a soft substance the power to penetrate a harder one. As soon as the frogs called out, "We are messengers of Hashem who created the world," the marble and stones immediately parted, allowing the frogs to penetrate them. In the course of history, Hashem often performed for our people the miracle of allowing a softer substance to pierce a harder one. Some examples are when the children of Israel began the conquest of Eretz Canaan. The Canaanim hid in caves, whose entrances they barricaded with rocks. Hashem sent hornets in front of the children of Israel, which had the miraculous ability to penetrate the rocks and inject poison into the eyes of the Canaanim, battling against the giant Goliath. David flung a stone at him, that stone pierced the giant's iron helmet and sank into his forehead, and Goliath fell dead. The shamir worm was used by the children of Israel to split diamonds and rocks needed in the construction of the Mishkan and Beit Hamikdash. Whenever an Egyptian woman heated her oven in order to bake bread, the frogs would hop into the dough and nibble at it. The woman therefore put it hurriedly into the oven. The frogs, though, clung to the dough, allowing themselves to be baked together with it. They cooled off the heat so that no bread was ever baked well. When the Emperor Nebuchadnezzar erected a statue in his honor and commanded his subjects to prostrate themselves before it, Hananiah, Mishael, and Uzziah refused. They reasoned, "We must take a lesson from the frogs in Egypt." They leapt into the ovens, sacrificing their lives for Kiddush Hashem. If the frogs were ready to sacrifice their lives for Hashem, we must certainly be prepared to do the same. The Egyptians suffered severely from the plague of frogs. Not a single Egyptian could evade the frog plague. As soon as he would fill a cup to take a drink, he would find it full of disgusting frogs, yet they considered the croaking, which continued even after they entered the Egyptians' stomachs, to be worse than their destructive actions. There was absolutely no way to get rid of the frogs, for if an Egyptian attempted to kill one with a stick or stone, 6 new frogs sprang up instead. And so they had to give up all attempts to destroy them. Hashem was punishing the Egyptians. Mida kaneged mida. The Egyptians used to torture their unfortunate Jewish victims by ordering them to collect all types of loathsome creeping animals and insects for which they had no use except the sadistic delight in making the lives of the children of Israel miserable. Hashem therefore brought upon the Egyptians repulsive frogs which nauseated them. In return, Pharaoh called his magicians and asked them if they too were capable of producing frogs. Certainly, they answered and brought forth additional frogs. But they were at a loss when it came to getting rid of these existing ones. Pharaoh had no choice but to call Moshe and Aaron, entreat Hashem that he remove the frogs from me and from my people. He begged, "And I will let the children of Israel go. Now I will prove to you that this plague is a divine miracle and not a natural occurrence." Moshe announced to Pharaoh, "Name the time when the plague should end, and I will pray to Hashem to put a stop to it at the time you designate." "Tomorrow," said Pharaoh. "It shall be as you say," proclaimed Moshe, "so that you should know that there is none like Hashem, our God." Moshe cried out to the Almighty. On the very next day, the frogs in the houses, yards, and fields perished. But there was one exception. All the frogs that had willingly leapt into the ovens stayed alive and were allowed to return to the river. Hashem thus demonstrated that whoever sacrifices himself for Hashem's sake will never suffer a loss. The dead frogs did not disappear but were left lying all over Egypt. The Egyptians had to shovel them together since there were so many of them. Each Egyptian collected at least 4 piles of frogs. The dead frogs were even more revolting than the live ones. They emitted a sickening stench which permeated the entire land. The Egyptians were thus repaid mida for having beaten the Jews mercilessly until a foul odor emanated from their mouths. The plague of frogs afflicted only the Egyptians, but spared the children of Israel. In fact, if a Jew and an Egyptian would walk on the road at the same time, the frog would run away from the Jew and jump onto the Egyptian as soon as the plague ended. Pharaoh again hardened his heart. This is typical of all wicked ones who never do sincere teshuvah but only make promises under duress, rescinding them as soon as they feel relief. The third plague was not preceded by a warning since Pharaoh had ignored the warnings preceding the last two plagues. Hashem commanded Moshe, "Tell Aharon to stretch out his staff and smite the dust of Egypt so that it may become lice." The commandment to bring about this plague was once again directed to Aharon and not to Moshe, since it would be improper for Moshe to smite the dust which had concealed the body of the Egyptian, whom he slew. When Aharon smote the dust, lice appeared and infested the Egyptians and their animals. They pricked their bodies like needles and also filled the fields and settled on the crops. Why were the Egyptians afflicted with this plague? The Almighty punished them in this manner for having ordered that the Jews sweep the dust from the streets and marketplaces. Mida. All the dust in Egypt was converted into lice. Even if they dug down the depth of 1 amma into the ground, they could find no earth, but only lice. As soon as this plague began, the children of Israel were free from slave labor since there was no longer any clean earth available for building. Pharaoh called his magicians to produce lice also. But this time they failed, although they had known how to convert a staff into a snake, water into blood, and how to produce frogs. They did not succeed in creating lice by magic. "We are unable to bring forth lice," they admitted to Pharaoh. Magic has no power over an object smaller than a barley corn. We are forced to admit that this plague results from the finger of God, from the plague of lice. They were able to retroactively comprehend that both previous plagues had also been divine wonders. The magicians therefore withdrew and from then on no longer attempted to imitate Moshe's wonders. How great were our forefathers, for Hashem revealed to them events which would occur many centuries later. In fact, he revealed to them the entire future until the end of time. Our forefather Yaakov prophetically foresaw the 10 plagues. He commanded Joseph to take his corpse out of Egypt since it was revealed to him that the plague of lice would, in the future, infest Egypt, and he did not want his corpse to suffer from it. The first 9 plagues may be divided into sets of 3. The first 2 plagues of each group were preceded by a warning, while the last came unannounced. The 4th plague was therefore preceded by a warning. Hashem commanded Moshe to rise early in the morning, meet Pharaoh by the Nile, and warn him to let the children of Israel leave. Say to him, Hashem instructed Moshe, "If you do not let my people go, I will send a mixture of wild beasts, serpents, and scorpions upon your land. They will fill the houses of Egypt and also the land. I will distinguish the land of Goshen, where my people dwell, by not permitting the beasts to enter it. You will then clearly realize that although my Sheching resides in heaven, I am Hashem who exercises his providence in the midst of the land." Hashem instructed Moshe to meet Pharaoh earlier than usual in the morning, for he was aware of Pharaoh's intentions. Pharaoh's secret thoughts were, "This Ben Amram comes to meet me every morning. Today I will make haste and leave before he arrives." Hashem therefore told Moshe to meet Pharaoh earlier than usual. Pharaoh did not heed Moshe's warning, which he repeatedly transmitted for 3 weeks. The wild beasts therefore flocked into Egypt. They consisted of many different kinds, such as lions, bears, snakes, scorpions, mice, weasels, birds of prey, insects, and so on. The beasts roared and trampled on everything and bit people. The flies and mosquitoes swarmed into their eyes and ears. The beasts first invaded Pharaoh's palace and then all the other Egyptian houses. The Egyptians locked themselves in their homes, securing the doors with all the locks and latches they possessed. Then tremendous sea monsters with arms 10 amos long emerged from the ocean. They climbed up the rooftops, stretched out their long arms, pried off all the locks, and opened the doors and windows. The wild beasts then entered every room of the Egyptian homes and prepared to stay there for the night, and terror upon terror. The domestic animals suddenly were no longer tame. The oxen and donkeys brayed wildly, baring their teeth and biting the Egyptians to death. Why did Hashem plague Egypt with wild beasts after the plague of lice? When the Egyptians realized that the children of Israel would no longer build cities for them, they devised a new form of barbarity to torment them. They ordered the Jews to catch wild beasts for them in the hope that they would be killed in the process. Moshe cried out to Hashem, "How can they catch lions without being devoured by them?" Hashem reassured him, "Do not fear, go out to the fields, turn to the beasts, and exclaim, 'So says Hashem, tomorrow you shall join together, invade Egypt and destroy it.' This task had been destined for you since you were created." Another reason why the Egyptians were smitten with the plague of wild beasts was that they afflicted the children of Israel by ordering them to watch their children. They used to force a Jew to carry 4 Egyptian children at the same time, 2 on his shoulders and 2 in his arms. When the plague of wild beasts began and a Jew was walking to the market, panting and moaning under the weight of the Egyptian children, a lion came and grabbed one. A bear loaded another on his shoulders, the wolf carried away a third, and the panther snatched a fourth. The Egyptian later asked the Jew, "Where are my children?" "I don't know," the Jew answered, "when I went shopping, carrying for children." A bear came and took one on his shoulders, a lion grabbed one, a wolf snatched one, and a panther another. I have not seen them since. Hashem, however, did not allow the beasts to invade the land of Goshen where the children of Israel lived. Pharaoh called Moshe and Aaron. "You may sacrifice to your God in this land, but I cannot let you go into the wilderness," he told them. "We cannot do that." Moshe replied, "Our sacrifices are the sheep which the Egyptians worship. They will certainly not allow us to sacrifice their gods before their very eyes without stoning us. Let us travel 3 days' journey into the desert, and sacrifice to Hashem our God as he shall command us." Pharaoh replied, "Go and sacrifice to your God, but do not go very far away. Entreat Hashem to have mercy on me and remove the wild beasts." Moshe said, "I will entreat Hashem on your behalf, but do not deceive us about the fulfillment of your promise." Moshe left Pharaoh and prayed to Hashem to bring an end to the plague. Moshe's tefillah was accepted by Hashem, and the wild beasts were removed. They did not perish as the frogs had, so that the Egyptians should not derive benefit by using their skins for leather or their meat for food. Instead, they disappeared without leaving a trace. The morning, for he was aware of Pharaoh's intentions. Pharaoh's secret thoughts were, "This Ben Amram comes to meet me every morning. Today I will make haste and leave before he arrives." Hashem therefore told Moshe to meet Pharaoh earlier than usual. Pharaoh did not heed Moshe's warning, which he repeatedly transmitted for 3 weeks. The wild beasts therefore flocked into Egypt. They consisted of many different kinds, such as lions, bears, snakes, scorpions, mice, weasels, birds of prey, insects, and so on. The beasts roared and trampled on everything and bit people. The flies and mosquitoes swarmed into their eyes and ears. The beasts first invaded Pharaoh's palace and then all the other Egyptian houses. The Egyptians locked themselves in their homes, securing the doors with all the locks and latches which they possessed. Then tremendous sea monsters with arms 10 amos long emerged from the ocean. They climbed up the rooftops, stretched out their long arms, pried off all the locks, and opened the doors and windows. The wild beasts then entered every room of the Egyptian homes and prepared to stay there for the night. And terror upon terror, the domestic animals suddenly were no longer tame. The oxen and donkeys brayed wildly, baring their teeth and biting the Egyptians to death. But Pharaoh again hardened his heart and did not allow the children of Israel to leave. Hashem told Moshe to warn Pharaoh that unless he released the Jews, heavy pestilence would be imposed upon Egypt the very next day. Hashem set the beginning of the plague for the next day to prevent the Egyptians from claiming it was a natural sickness rather than a miracle. Moreover, the announcement gave Pharaoh time to repent. Pharaoh ignored the warning. On the following day, a heavy pestilence struck the Egyptian animals, and a large number of them perished. Not only did the animals die, but the riders perished too, together with their horses, the shepherds with their sheep, the donkey drivers with their donkeys, and the camel drivers with their camels. The pestilence, however, spared any animal belonging to one of the children of Israel, as well as those that were the common property of a Jew and an Egyptian. Any Egyptian who had seized the animal of a Jew and fraudulently claimed it was his was now disproved. since that animal did not perish. The Egyptian had to admit it belonged to a Jew and was compelled to return it. Not only did the animals of the children of Israel survive, but, in fact, it was a time of well-being for the children of Israel during which they suffered no financial losses or worry. Why did Hashem bring the plague of pestilence? The Egyptians had forced the Jews to become shepherds and donkey drivers in deserted spots and distant mountains to prevent them from multiplying. As punishment, their animals perished. The first 3 plagues, blood, frogs, and lice, which arose from below, were brought about by Aaron. 3 plagues originating from the sky, hail, locusts, and darkness, were brought about by Moshe. 3 plagues were brought about by Hashem himself, wild beasts, pestilence, and the smiting of the firstborn. The plague of boils was brought about by a partnership of all 3, Hashem, Moshe, and Aaron. Hashem commanded Moshe and Aaron that each of them should take 2 handfuls of soot from a furnace. Aaron had to give his 2 fistfuls of soot to Moshe, who then threw all the soot up to the sky. Hashem converted it into leprous boils, which descended upon the Egyptians and their animals. Moshe and Aaron picked up the soot in Pharaoh's presence, and Moshe threw it up towards the sky. The act of bringing the boils upon the Egyptians included 3 miracles. 1. Although normally a person is incapable of shooting an arrow further than 100 amos, the soot thrown up by Moshe reached to the kisei hakavat itself, even though soot, being weightless, would usually not fly far. 2. Moshe's one hand miraculously held for fistfuls of soot he had picked up with both his hands and given to him by Aaron. 3. This amount of soot would ordinarily suffice to cover only an area of 4 amos, but when Moshe threw it up, it dispersed over the entire land of Egypt. This plague was brought about spectacularly by the common actions of Hashem, Moshe, and Aaron, as it was the most harmful of all the 10 plagues. It brought physical suffering upon every single Egyptian, not merely harming their possessions. The plague of boils was unlike any disease the Egyptians had ever experienced. Its symptoms resembled those of leprosy, but comprised a combination of 24 different types of leprosy. The blisters covering their bodies were moist inside and dry on the outside. It was impossible to relieve the pain. Any ointment that softened the exterior dry crust aggravated the moist inner layer, and any medication that relieved the oozing moisture irritated the dry part. Pharaoh's magicians were stricken so severely with boils that they could not stand on their feet when Moshe and Aaron entered the palace. They were punished for suggesting that the Jewish newborns be cast into the Nile to exterminate Moshe, and for pronouncing the death sentence upon Moshe when, as a child, he took Pharaoh's crown. The magicians did not recover from the boils, even after the plague ended, and remained sick until they died. The plague of boils befell the Egyptians as a midah punishment for their crimes against the Jews. They had compelled the children of Israel to prepare bathwater by heating or cooling it, yet now they could no longer bathe, for their boils made them unable to tolerate contact with hot or cold water. Additionally, the Egyptians relentlessly drove the children of Israel to work without allowing them even a moment's rest to scratch an itch. Now the Egyptians themselves felt irritation without relief, while the Egyptians had not been greatly stirred by the previous plagues. They found the boils intolerable and cried out, "This is a horrible plague." Pharaoh summoned Moshe and Aaron, begging them to terminate the plague. Here's your text formatted into clear paragraphs without altering the content. But once the boils disappeared, Pharaoh did not keep his promises. Hashem hardened his heart to punish him for having refused to do teshuvah during the first 5 plagues. It became increasingly difficult for Pharaoh to repent. But he nevertheless still retained the freedom of choice to obey Hashem were he only to make a sincere effort. Hashem commanded Moshe, "Rise very early to appear in Pharaoh's palace and warn him about the plague of hail." Hashem knew that Pharaoh, on this particular morning, was planning to conceal himself from Moshe. For this reason, he told Moshe to appear in the palace earlier than usual, even before Pharaoh would go out to the Nile. "Tell him, thus says Hashem, the God of the Hebrews, let my people go so that they may serve me, for this time I will send all my plagues upon you so that you shall know that there is none like me on earth. I could easily have wiped you all out in the plague of pestilence, but I confined that plague to the animals, keeping you alive to show you my power so that my name should be proclaimed throughout the world." Hashem announced that through the plague of hailstones, his greatness would be acknowledged by the Egyptians. On seeing the hailstones that were a combination of fire and water which clearly denied natural law, they would have to admit that the cosmos was governed by divine providence and not by natural law. Hashem instructed Moshe to tell Pharaoh, "Since you still tread on my people and refuse to let them go, I shall cause very heavy hail to fall at this time tomorrow, hail the like of which was never seen, neither in Egypt nor anywhere else in the world. Now gather in your cattle and whatever you have in the fields, because whatever is not gathered in will be hit by the hail and perish." Hashem's warning is revealing of his great compassion even for the wicked and their belongings. Hashem had pity on the Egyptians and their animals. He therefore admonished them to gather in their animals in order that they should be spared from the hail. Moshe transmitted Hashem's words to Pharaoh. He made an indentation on Pharaoh's sundial to indicate the exact hour that the plague would begin on the following day. Pharaoh, however, exclaimed, "Why should we now listen to this Ben Amram more than on all previous occasions?" He left his animals in the field, and so did most of the Egyptians, except for some who were God-fearing, such as Pharaoh's counselor Job. The wicked may be likened to the stormy sea. The first wave declares, "I will roll up to the shore and flood the world," but as soon as it reaches the sand, it breaks. The wave that follows it again announces, "I am going to flood the world," but it also breaks at the shore. Each wave makes the same proclamation. It never takes a lesson from the previous one. Thus, Pharaoh was conceited and therefore suffered, but Amalek failed to learn from him. Amalek also was punished for his arrogance, yet Sikon, Og, Balak, and all the oppressors of the Jewish people did not learn from the downfall of their predecessors. This plague began as a mere rain because Hashem hoped that the Egyptians would still do teshuvah. Eventually, the rain was converted into a storm, thunder crashed, lightning struck, and the earth quaked. Then huge hailstones rained down from heaven, composed of blocks of ice and of fire. But the fire did not consume the ice, nor did the ice extinguish the fire. Two clans were involved in a lifelong family feud which was passed on from one generation to the next. They would take every opportunity to harm and do damage to each other. One day a mighty king beleaguered the country, threatening to take possession of the entire land. The ruler of the threatened country made a brief announcement about the enemy's planned invasion. The two opposing clans immediately abandoned their personal squabble and unified in order to drive out the common foreign danger. Similarly, although fire and water by nature are elements hostile to each other, when the Almighty called them to wage war against the Egyptians, they immediately joined forces. Hashem punished the Egyptians with hail containing fire in order to punish them in a manner similar to the wicked ones in Gehenna who must undergo the torments of fire. The loud crashing of the falling hailstones rocked the land. Whoever was in the fields, man or beast alike, was hit, frozen by ice and burnt by the fire. Many of them perished. The fright of the surviving Egyptians was overwhelming. They hurried to return their animals to the stables, but it was too late. The hailstones piled up in front of them, forming a solid wall of ice and fire, which they could not penetrate. Seeing that there was no chance of bringing their animals to the stables alive, the Egyptians slaughtered them so that they would at least benefit from their meat. They placed the slaughtered animals on their shoulders, but big birds of prey flew down from the sky and devoured all the carcasses. The hail broke entire trees and destroyed the crops, including the deepest roots in the ground. All produce was ruined except for the wheat and spelt, which Hashem wanted to spare so that the locusts would devour it. Some Egyptians ran to the land of Goshen to escape from the hail, but the hailstones fell upon them there too without ever touching a Jew. Pharaoh was amazed at the marvelous unification of fire and water and dismayed at the havoc the hail had wrought. He sent for Moshe and Aaron and confessed, "I have sinned this time. Hashem is righteous, for he warned us previously to gather in the people and animals so that we should be saved. And I and my people are wicked for having disregarded his warning and caused innocent blood to be spilled. Entreat Hashem that he end the plague. I will let you all go." Moshe answered him, "I will pray for you, but I cannot do so inside the city which is full of idols. I will leave the city and pray outside, in the open. I do not actually believe your words, for I know that you do not truly fear God and will later change your mind." I will nevertheless end the plague by means of my prayers in order that you should recognize Hashem's greatness. Moshe left the city and spread out his hands in supplication. As soon as he lifted his hands, before he had uttered one word of tefillah, the hail ceased. Even the hailstones that were on their way down to the ground did not continue falling but remained suspended. In the air, they remained there for the next 41 years, finally raining down in the time of Yehoshua. On which occasion did this happen? When 5 Amorite kings assembled for war against the children of Israel, Hashem promised Yehoshua, "Do not fear, for I have delivered them into your hand." Yehoshua attacked the enemies. Taking them by surprise, Hashem struck them with confusion, and the children of Israel pursued them. When the enemy troops were on the descent to Beit Coron, Hashem cast down huge hailstones, and they died. The thunder came to a sudden halt as soon as Moshe prepared to pray. The unfinished crash of the thunder resumed its sound in Yehoram's time, in the days of Yehoram ben Akov, who was a rasher. The king of Aram besieged the children of Israel. Food in Eretz Israel was scarce, and in the 6th year of the siege, the famine had reached its peak. The children of Israel cooked and ate their own children, as foretold in the reproof. King Yehoram sent a messenger to the prophet Elisha, whom he blamed for the misfortune, intending to execute. The prophet Elisha, however, was aware of his intentions and guarded himself. He prophesied, "Tomorrow at this time a measure of flour shall be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel, a very low price." When the messenger heard the prophet's words, he derided them. He was cursed by Elisha at that time. There were 4 lepers outside the gates of the city who had been secluded according to the Torah law concerning a leper. They said, "Why should we wait here to die? Let us go to the camp of Aram. If they let us live, good, and if not, let them kill us." When they entered the camp of Aram, they were met by an unexpected sight. The camp had been deserted in a hurry, and the enemies' belongings left behind. Hashem had threatened them with the thunderous rumbling of horses and chariots, bringing upon them that very same thunder which had been reserved for that purpose since Pharaoh's time. They believed a large army to be coming out against them, and they all fled. The silver, gold, and the vast amount of food of the camp of Aram fell into the hands of the children of Israel, and Elisha's prophecy was literally fulfilled. Some of the hailstones are still suspended in the sky and will rain down in the future during the period of Gog and Magog. The Midrash teaches us that Hashem had prepared a certain amount of punishment for Pharaoh on account of Moshe's tefillah. He withheld part of the punishment, storing it for the wicked ones who would oppress the community of Israel in future generations. From the fact that the hail ceased the very moment Moshe made ready to pray to Hashem, we discern the greatness of a tzaddik. The tzaddik has the power to decree, and Hashem fulfills his will immediately. We find additional instances of tzaddikim whose words were immediately fulfilled by heaven. In the time of Koni Hamagail, Eretz Israel suffered from 3 successive years of famine. Despite all prayers and entreaties to the Almighty, no rain fell. A delegation of Koni Hamagail's students went to the tzaddik, requesting, "Pray for rain. Take in all the ovens that are in the yards, so that they should not be ruined by the rain." He ordered. Koni prayed, but no rain descended. He drew a circle, stood in the middle imitating the prophet Habakkuk, who had stood in a circle and said, "I will not move from here, Hashem, until you answer my tefillah," and prayed, "Master of the universe, your children have turned to me. Because I am like a Ben Beta member of the household of yours, I swear by your great name that I shall not move from here until you have mercy upon your children." Rain began to drip down little by little. "Rabbi," the students implored him, "this rain is not sufficient. Apparently only a minimal quantity fell. Sufficient to absolve you from your oath that you would not step out of this circle unless it would rain. Do not allow us to die of the famine." Koni said to Hashem, "This is not what I asked for. I want sufficient rain to fill all the cisterns and wells." A flood of destructive rain poured down, with each drop as big as a barrel. "Rabbi," the students cried out, "this rain will destroy the world. Do not allow us to die. This is not what I asked for." Koni said to Hashem, "I want a rain of goodness and blessing." Then a blissful rain began to fall. All the Jews had to leave the city of Yerushalayim and seek shelter under the roof of the Har Habet, which was protected. Koni's students begged him, "Rabbi, just as you prayed to bring rain, so pray now that it should cease." He replied, I know by tradition that it is not correct to pray for a blessing to depart, but nevertheless, bring me a bullock on which to place my hands and recite the vidui. He placed both hands on the bullock and prayed, Master of the universe, your people Israel whom you brought out of Egypt are able to bear neither too much goodness nor too much punishment. When you were wroth with them, they could not accept it. And now that you are showering them with blessing, they cannot bear it either. May it be your will that the rains cease and the world find relief. Immediately, a wind began to blow, the clouds dispersed, and the sun appeared when the people went out to the fields. They found that mushrooms had sprouted in the rain. Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach, the president of the Sanhedrin, sent a message to Koni, saying, Were you not Koni? I would banish you because of the imperious manner of speech you used towards the Almighty. But what shall I do? You entreat Hashem, like a son who pleads before his father, and he fulfills your wish. If even Koni, with his tefillah, was able to change the laws of nature, how much more so was Moshe himself? Rabbi Kanina ben Dosa was traveling on the road, holding in his hand a container of salt when it began to rain. Said Rabbi Kanina, everyone is happy because the rain will irrigate the fields. But Kanina is sad because the salt will dissolve. The rain stopped immediately. When he arrived home, he prayed, Master of the universe, should the whole world be sad and Kanina happy? Rain began to fall once again. The standards of righteousness of our great sages were such that Hashem immediately fulfilled their wishes. Why did Hashem end this plague faster than the previous ones? Answering Moshe's tefillah even before he began to pray, Pharaoh had begun to praise Hashem, saying, Hashem is righteous. Since Hashem does not want the praises of a rasha, he immediately removed the plague in order to prevent Pharaoh from continuing to laud him. Thank you for joining this week's journey through the Midrash. If you enjoyed this story, don't keep it to yourself. Share this channel with someone. Please hit the like, share and subscribe button for the next story. See you next week on Midrash Says Out Loud.